everyone, and welcome to episode 33 of What to Think, the technology news podcast from VentureBeat.com. My name is Dylan Tweeney, the editor of VentureBeat. I'm here with Mark Sullivan.
Hello.
Mark is one of our talented writing and reporting crew. And today we're going to be talking with Fred Paul, the editor-in-chief of New Relic, our host and sponsor, and also with Barry Levine, one of the other writers on our team. And we're going to talk about some of the top trends and topics of the year as seen through the lens of the world of technology. But first, let's talk about some tech news highlights from VentureBeat. Let's start with this story about Google having a plan to eliminate the CAPTCHA. Now, first of all, the CAPTCHA is this sort of annoying thing that many online forums do, like when you're registering for an account on something. They have this little thing that's meant to prove whether you're a human being or just a robot. And it's basically like a little scrambled up image that you can barely read, and you have to try to figure out what the numbers or the letters are and type it into the box. And if you do it right, then they have a pretty good idea that you're a human. But Google thinks it has a simpler way. So to tell the people how that works, Mark.
It's just a checkbox.
Like, I am not a robot. Yes,
I'm not
no.
a robot, exactly. I mean, that's literally what it says. I'm not a robot, and there's a checkbox there. But apparently, Google sort of studies your movements before and after you check the checkbox. So, maybe the speed you check it, or what you do before and after too. And they have ways of deciding that you're not a bot. And
we have ways of deciding whether you're a bot. Exactly. Okay, so of course I trust Google to come up with the right answer, but we tried to find out what exactly it was that they were using, and they were a little bit cagey about it, strangely enough. I think they're worried that somebody might come up with a bot that can bypass their new checkbox.
Yeah, or, if bots were listening when they said that, there may be a threat there.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm all in favor of just checking a box to say that I'm not a robot. So if Google can make it work, this what they call a no CAPTCHA reCAPTCHA sounds like a great improvement to me.
Those CAPTCHA things that's one of the worst inventions of the internet, I believe. That's certainly one of the most annoying things.
It's annoying. I will say, in the CAPTCHA's defense, there's a version of CAPTCHA called reCAPTCHA, which they actually are using to help figure out difficult words in documents that have been scanned, like old books and things like that. And they're using humans to kind of fill in the gaps where the OCR algorithms are not able to figure out the letters. So maybe there's a little bit of utility in some of these.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. So that sounds useful, sure.
But it is awfully annoying to have to fill that out. It's like, okay, now I have to do like a visual acuity test. Let's move on to Epic. You had a really interesting story about Epic Systems, which is one of the big players in digital health. Tell us about that, Mark.
Yeah, Epic is a company based out in Madison, Wisconsin. They're not really very on the radar, very media shy, but they do electronic health records. And as a matter of fact, they're said to store more than half of the whole country's patient records on their systems. So they're a pretty important company, especially as health reform says we've got to be circulating this information back and forth between different ERs and hospitals, and to make the whole care coordination thing more efficient and less costly.
So say I go to the emergency room, like if they're using the Epic system, they'd be able to create or call up a digital record that has all my vital stats and my health history and stuff on that. But if they wanted to get information from my primary care physician, they'd have to import that from the physician's EHR, right?
Right, which works really well if that physician group is also on an Epic system. But so the story I wrote was about Epic's approach to getting health records from non-Epic systems. And they've taken a lot of criticism for not being very progressive in doing that. And there was a New York Times article at the end of September criticizing them for that. And what my article did was kind of go way deeper and examine this. And as it turns out, Epic really isn't the bad guy here. Among their peers, among other EHRs, Epic is really not much worse, and they might be considered better in a lot of ways.
Now, you talked to their CEO, Judy Faulkner, right?
Right. She's an amazing woman. She's a computer scientist and built that company from the ground up, and they're a very big company, still a privately held company, and so she's famously media shy, and VentureBeat was just one of a handful of media outlets that's ever interviewed her. So it was a big opportunity, and I spoke to her on the phone and found her to be a really good interview and a really nice lady.
One of the sources that you talked to essentially acknowledged that healthcare IT is way behind the rest of the industry. There's a quote, somebody saying, we're probably 15 years behind the banking industry in terms of how advanced our technology is. Is that a hurdle that healthcare is surmounting? Are they getting over that?
I think you'll hear a lot of people talk about that, and they'll use that specific example about how we're way behind banking, and it really is putting a fire under that industry. There's a lot of people working on making data more interchangeable, but that same source also makes the point that, when you're talking about banking, you're talking about dollars and cents and a sender and a receiver, but in clinical information, it's way more fluid and way more complicated than financial information. So we're really, we're wrestling with ways of finding standards where a lab somewhere can easily trade information with some other lab on some other system. So it's a big problem, and it's a hard problem, and it's going to take a while to fix. But it's interesting because when they do fix it, it's going to have a direct impact on how much we're paying as a country for healthcare.
And your sense from talking to Epic and to other players in the space is that they're not just sitting on their hands trying to be all proprietary, but they're actually taking this challenge seriously.
I think so. I'm not sure how long they've been doing that, but since the Affordable Care Act came out, that's a big tenet in Affordable Care is the exchange of information. So there is some pressure from the government coming toward these players on that. But there's also people saying that the government isn't doing enough to establish these standards either.
Well, it's a great story. I highly recommend it. You did a really good job with that feature on Epic. Let's go now from the serious technology story to a completely ludicrous one. This is actually, perhaps predictably, the most popular story on VentureBeat in the last week. And it's about YouPorn, a pornography site, sort of the YouTube of porn, I guess, and how they are now sponsoring an esports team, a Spanish team called Play to Win, which after the sponsorship will be renamed Team YP. I guess it just goes to show you, you put sports and video games and porn together and people will click on that story, Mark.
Yeah, what else do you want? I mean,
I think it also shows maybe how huge esports has really become. I mean, on a more serious note, there were stories in the Times this week about how colleges are now offering scholarships to kids who are really good video game players so that they can join the college's esports teams and make them more competitive in international tournaments. I guess it's a world that probably only the most serious video gamers really know very much about.
I guess so. I had no idea until a couple of years ago how popular this was. But I know a lot of people that do it, and I know a lot of people that spend a lot of time on it, and tempted to try it myself. It must be a lot of fun. So.
Yeah. I will say, however, that sponsorship from YouPorn isn't exactly the kind of thing that lends your team a lot of credibility. But, who knows? Maybe the deal was very good, or Team YP really needed some kind of backing. I don't know. That is all the time we have for at the moment, but we're going to go to our guest segment in just a minute. But before we do, I want to take a minute to thank the host and sponsor of this podcast, New Relic, in whose studio we are recording this show. It's a software analytics company that makes sense of billions of points of data coming from millions of applications all in real time. It's a comprehensive SaaS-based software analytics platform used by developers, IT, and business leaders. It helps the people who build modern software understand the stories that their data is trying to tell them about app performance and their entire business. And now let's go to our guest. We've brought Fred Paul, the editor-in-chief of New Relic, into the studio with us. Hi, Fred.
Good to be here.
And we've also got Barry Levine from the VentureBeat's staff on the line.
Hello.
What I want to do with this conversation for the next 20 minutes is just talk about some of the top stories from the year and some of the big things that the tech industry and the blogosphere were obsessed with in 2014. I think we got to start with Bing, of course, because everybody uses Bing. And they listed their top search terms of 2014. And, of course, Kim Kardashian was at the top of the list.
That's a huge surprise.
Is this last year's list, too?
What I want to know is if Kim Kardashian is, not on the top of the list in, say, Google's top search terms. We haven't seen Google's list yet, but what do you think, Fred?
Well, I think that Kim Kardashian probably is at the top of the list, and I'm sure that Beyonce is really, really upset about being knocked off the top of that list.
Is the message here that people like butts?
Yeah, well, I mean, we didn't even get to that photo, but yeah, probably. I mean, who doesn't?
Good point.
Let's talk about Facebook. This is the time of year when every company has kind of its own list of top search terms, top things that people were talking about. Facebook, maybe slightly more classy than Bing users because their top topic was the World Cup.
Well, Bing must be thrilled that Facebook is more classy than they are.
The World Cup, as it turns out, which happened in Brazil this year, Facebook had said earlier this year that the sporting event was the most talked about event in the entire 10-year history of Facebook. So I guess people like soccer, huh?
Well, around the world they do. Surprisingly, people seem to be interested in the U.S. this year to a greater extent than I would have suspected up front.
It's true.
This is a breakthrough year for soccer in the U.S., I think, definitely.
But isn't every year the breakthrough year for soccer in the U.S.?
This year really was. Everybody was talking about the World Cup this year.
Yeah, that's true. It actually turns out that in the U.S., if you look at U.S. statistics only, Facebook says that the Ebola outbreak claimed the top spot, and the World Cup was in 6th place among U.S. users.
Well, and you have to give Mark Zuckerberg credit. He came up with millions of dollars to help fight Ebola in Africa, so maybe he was looking at his own company's statistics.
Did he really?
He did.
Well, that's good.
Along with Paul Allen and Bill Gates also.
Well, good for them. Billionaires doing some good with their money. I can get behind that.
There are some billionaires missing from that list. We won't name any names, but it wouldn't be hard to figure out who the tech stars are that haven't been doing their part.
It's weird, though, because, I would say that soccer probably touches a lot more people's lives in the U.S. than Ebola. So it's weird that Ebola ranks so much higher.
It occurs to me that Ebola was such a huge event in television, on Fox, and it was made into such a big thing in health circles. Anyway, you had people calling it, an epidemic when there were only like one or two cases here, and it was just it was a huge media event. I'm not sure that the media knew quite what to do with soccer as much as it did with Ebola.
Well, Ebola is, I don't know. It's terrifying, I guess.
It bleeds and it leads.
Right. Exactly. Well, and nothing bleeds more than Ebola. Yeah.
So, okay.
Okay.
Sorry about it. Couldn't resist.
Let's take a look at Apple's top 10 list. So, Mark, did you look at this a little bit, in terms of, what sort of apps and games are leading the charge in the universe of iOS?
Yeah, they broke it down according to paid and unpaid and iPad versus iPhone. And there were some interesting things on here. One of the apps of the year that they chose was actually a wellness app. That's kind of a new thing here. The app was called Brain Training from Elevate, and this is for the iPhone. There are more and more of these types of apps, just brain training and awareness and mindfulness. And I thought it was really interesting that they named one of those apps as their app of the year.
Lumosity has gotten a lot of mileage out of their brain training app too. So this is a whole category now. It sounds like with a bunch of new entrants.
It seems to be growing. And then the app, the iPad app of the year was Pixelmator, which is an image or a graphics program that runs well on the iPad.
Great photo editor. Yeah. Alternative to Photoshop if you don't need all kinds of high-end stuff. I like Pixelmator a lot.
It's nice. It's really well designed, and I've used it for a while. I was kind of surprised to see it at the top of the list, frankly, but good choice.
Well, I think Apple's trying to promote the idea that you can actually do useful things on the devices, especially the iPad, as opposed to just consuming things. And so it makes sense to put an app like Pixelmator in there.
Now, is this their top list and like their editors' picks, their favorites, or were these the most popular? Do you know, Mark?
Those are actually the editors' picks.
Okay, so exactly what they're trying to promote their point of view of the iPad as a creativity device, which, to be fair, they've been doing for a couple of years, and I think since GarageBand and iMovie for the iPad have been out, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable position.
Absolutely.
On the top selling or most downloaded apps for the iPad, it was Minecraft Pocket Edition, and that's the top paid app. Actually, the top free app for iPad was YouTube, So no huge surprise there.
YouTube used to be installed in iOS by default, and then they removed it a couple of years ago, I believe.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. There was some little issue between the two companies or something.
Some kind of beef?
Yeah.
Google, Apple beef?
Yeah, I haven't heard much about that, but...
And then the top free app was Facebook Messenger, which a lot of people felt was kind of foisted upon them after it was taken apart from the main Facebook app. So they win that race.
By default, and probably they're probably happy about it. What's interesting, too, is that the Facebook Paper app on iOS still includes messaging and yet has not really taken off in the download stats at all.
So if I wanted to use Facebook messaging without getting the Messenger app, I could just use the Paper app instead?
Absolutely.
That's an interesting workaround. I did not know that.
How long that's going to remain true for, no one, I don't know, but it is true for now.
I have managed to avoid the Facebook apps because I discovered that it was too addictive, particularly on my phone. So I had to uninstall it from my phone to stop me from checking Facebook every 3 minutes throughout the day.
And has that worked out for you?
It's worked out great. I only check Facebook every 3 minutes when I'm sitting at my computer.
Okay, then.
Huge improvement.
You got to draw some limits somewhere. So, Barry, I wanted to ask you, you're working on a naughty and nice list for the end of the year. Can you give us a sneak preview of some of the companies or the technologies that are on those lists?
Oh, sure. We just made a list of the companies that seemed most appropriate to either get a slap on their hand on the naughty list or a pat on the back for the nice. Turns out we felt that Mark Zuckerberg actually would qualify in the nice part of the list. I know he's been the subject of many criticisms, but he did give the money for Ebola treatment. He did give the $25 million to Newark.
That's right, for schools and stuff,
systems. Right? $25 million to him, of course, is $25 to me, but still it's $25 million. Another interesting one on the nice list is the Giorno Pizza, which sent out a tweet that they were later embarrassed by, which, might land them on the naughty part of the list. But we put on the nice list because unlike others who have found themselves in that situation, other companies, what they did was somebody, we don't know who at the moment, spent hours and hours answering every tweet, every email personally and saying how sorry they were for it. So they really recovered nicely for that one.
That's an interesting social media management story. Barry, what was the tweet that got them so embarrassed?
It was for the football player that beat up his wife, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Which one? There seems to be so many options there.
This one was Rice, yeah.
The hashtag around that discussion was hashtag why I stayed, which was a huge discussion on Twitter about women who have been abused and why they ended up staying with the one that abused them.
And they tweeted, hashtag why I stayed, you had pizza.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they recovered.
Spending hours issuing individual apologies to people who are offended by your cluelessness on Twitter. Maybe that's not a sustainable media strategy, but that is a good example of what a brand should do when they make a really boneheaded mistake, which they seem to do.
Mistakes. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just another one on the nice list that we felt really deserve a pat on the back are two kinds of drones. Now that drones are becoming more and more prevalent. One we call the polite drones, which are being developed by the University of Sheffield in the UK. They basically do this Alphonse and Gaston routine where when they meet each other, they're autonomous. And when they meet each other, they sort of do after you, after you, after you.
To each other? Like they're being polite about which one gets to...
They're being polite about who goes first. If they're flying around, they're autonomous. And they're flying around and they see each other. They you go first. Now you go first.
Oh, no. So it's I want to fire a rocket on the insurgents first. No, after you. No, I want to fire the rocket. No, after you.
and also in that vein is another set of drones called Xano drones, which were on Kickstarter. And basically they are personal drones, tiny drones, but they have an invisible tether from you, so they stay the same distance from you all the time. A dog on a leash behind you or something.
So perfect for taking selfies?
Yes.
Or dronies, exactly. I guess they're called?
Dronies.
Or protecting you somehow. But there's a certain politeness in these that we found appealing.
That's good, because I think politeness and drones is not two words that you ordinarily find in the same sentence.
Well, and it makes sense. If you have a personal protection drone, you want it within missile range at all times.
Exactly.
or am I missing something here?
And if they got to fly over our heads, at least let them, say please and thank you.
Exactly.
There you go.
Give us a hint of who's on the naughty list. That would be great.
Well, of course, we had to put Uber.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't any avoiding that. They seem to be spending most of the year trying to get themselves on our naughty list.
Let's talk about Uber for a minute, because this company, first of all, has a fantastic valuation. It's somewhere north of $40 billion, according to reports, based on their latest fundraising, which was, a raise of $1.2 billion in cash. And they're using that money to expand quite aggressively internationally, as well as among U.S. cities. And they're doing very well at that. They're providing a service that I think a lot of people feel is a very good service.
Well, I think that's been part of the issue that's happened this year, is that a lot of people do like the service,
right,
and then have felt betrayed by things they didn't like, or what they saw that coming out that they didn't like in the corporate culture. And it wouldn't have been a big deal if they didn't like the service. I mean, you saw all those anguished stories about people deleting their Uber app, which they didn't want to do, but felt that they had to. And it's a really interesting place for a company to be of that size.
Do you think it really matters to Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber? Do you think he really cares that people think he's a jerk?
That he's on the naughty list? Doubtful.
There's been some pieces written about those kind of guys, those aggressive, sort of cocky guys. And
I think we can just go ahead and call them assholes.
I didn't want to say it, but yes. And those are...
I think he does care, because actually today I saw an email from Uber where they are promoting that they are giving away food to people who need it over the holidays, and this big promotion. So
right.
I think they're conscious of their public opinion.
I think the issue is that they're concerned that it will ultimately affect the company's fortunes, from user base and growth to valuation to all the other issues. And I think they're rightly concerned about that. I think that even if it is a good service, if people are not feeling good about the company, that will lower usage. How much, I could never say, but I think people do want to feel good about these things.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think there are consultants that you can hire to come in and, give Uber that image of being compassionate and feel good. In fact, Uber was driving around giving people flu shots well before this thing even blew up over the journalist thing. So in terms of the question of what kind of a guy the leader is, I'm not sure how much those two things have to do with each other.
And I'm not sure that what kind of a guy he is matters to most of their customers either. They're like, I like the service, I'm going to use it.
And there are plenty of successful companies run by people you might not want to have a beer with.
Yes.
Exactly. In fairness, Uber isn't the only company on our naughty list.
I don't want to give away the whole story before you publish it, but let's hold that thought for now, because I think in a couple weeks you're going to be running this towards the end of the year.
Yeah, before the end of the year.
All right, so come back to VentureBeat.com, all you listeners, and you'll be able to see the full naughty and nice list from Barry. I want to talk about my own sort of nice list, which is some of the startups that really stood out this year. I compiled a list at the beginning of 2014, which was a long list of startups to watch for the coming year. And I'm going to do the same thing again in January 2015. So I invite anyone listening to this podcast to email me your nominations, Dylan@VentureBeat.com. Put in the subject line Startup of the Year or something like that. Or you can make a comment on the podcast post on our website, and I'll collect your nominations. Just to kick things off, I'd like to hear you guys tell me what you think some of the startups of the year. And Fred, you're not allowed to nominate your own company.
That makes it really hard.
Okay.
Mark, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I wrote a couple of things about Yo, which I can see on your list here, Dylan, and I found them to be a very interesting startup because...
They're fascinating, aren't they?
Yes, they really are. Not only are the founders really funny, like masters of the one-liner, which is important, I think, in making people like me like them, but their business about the simplicity of just sending people a yo. That's a form of communication. Just the medium itself is a form of communication. And the reason I think they're important is I think they're influential. I think you're seeing other companies, other products that kind of are seeing this mindset of this really, really simple forms of communication. And
Interesting.
I think I see that coming out in other products.
They kind of blew up this past spring or summer when they got really popular. Are people still using Yo?
Oh, I have no idea. I think they've got to really think about what their use cases are. They have an API or a developer kit, and they're trying to get people to develop around their core technology. They've talked about finding applications within the enterprise, and I think that's going to be the secret from them. Frankly, I haven't heard much about them in the last couple of months.
Maybe not a standout startup of the year, but we were talking earlier, there is a startup that got a lot of buzz earlier and now doesn't seem to have as much, and that's Secret. And
Yes.
What is up with Secret?
That is a good question. I don't know. I think that they got a lot of static early in the year for basically they were turning into a cesspool of rumor and unfounded allegations about people and trash talking and even harassment. And so they instituted a new rule, which was you can't use people's real names when you post something on Secret. Since then, I haven't heard very much about them. So I don't know if that was successful or if everyone was like, this is boring now.
It's not an indictment of Secret so much as maybe an indictment of all us people who make Kim Kardashian our top search term.
Exactly. We're now all on Yik Yak because that allows us to trash talk our friends as much as we want.
I'm particularly interested in Swerve, which is a mobile marketing automation platform that allows people to send marketing messages to people on mobile devices. But they did some interesting things this year, one of which was they opened their platform more than just providing APIs. They're really trying to sort of move that whole mobile marketing environment into becoming an ecosystem. And they're one of the few I see out there who's not sort of carving their own territory. And another I would pick is Prezi, which does Flash-based presentations, which would seem to have a limited lifespan given Flash's current situation. But they're driving ahead. They're getting lots of users. They're really moving forward. They're revamping their platform. I think they're going to stick around.
They're popping up everywhere. They make these weird kind of swooping, flying, animated presentations, which some people find very off-putting, but are certainly interesting and unique. There are a lot more startups that I want to talk about, but we're going to have to wind this up now because we are running out of time. So we will come back to the kind of highlights of the year discussion in a future podcast. And be sure to check out VentureBeat.com for the latest tech news and all kinds of great end-of-year features that we are busily hammering out as we speak. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast in iTunes yet, please do so. Just search for What to Think on iTunes. And we'll catch you next time. Peace out, everyone.